Senator McKim, if you just want to insult officers, we'll move to someone else.
No, I've got multiple questions.
Okay, well, please ask the question.
I can assure you I'm not going to run out of questions.
Please ask the question.
Yeah, so just given that I've asked one question and you've answered a question I didn't ask, I'll just ask again, specifically in the context of the Manus Island RPC. You're giving evidence that the Australian government is aware that the basic necessities that support human life will be removed from anyone left there after the 31st
I've denied that completely and resolutely.
No. So if someone's there after the 31st of October, how do they access drinking water, for example, Mr. Pizzullo?
They go to their government-provided accommodation.
You're not listening to my question. I'll be very clear because I don't want there to be any confusion here. I'm asking specifically in the context of the Manus Island RPC,
yes.
and I in my previous question specifically referenced anyone who might be there after the 31st of October.
Yes, so if someone is trespassing on a PNG naval establishment, that itself is an issue, which PNG, as I said to Senator Carr, will need to resolve in its own mind, because presumably there are issues around trespass there. They'll need to deal with that. But in terms of what the Australian government is providing, which is what I'm responsible for, people have access to meals, they'll have access to a bed. I could state it again. And does that mean that it's 35 minutes driving down the road? Yes, that's where their bed is. And is that where the clinic is? Yes, and I could rattle them all off. So any suggestion that we're denying them or depriving them of access to their basic needs and therefore infringing their basic human rights, I reject utterly.
So you're saying that if people are still in what is now the Manus Island RPC after the 31st of October, they will have access to drinking water, will they?
No.
So you're denying them their basic human rights.
So Mr. Pizzullo, they don't have a human right to trespass on a naval base.
They've got a human right to have enough water to keep them alive, and I would be astounded if you would dispute that.
There'll be plenty of places for them to access that clean water.
The problem you have here, Mr. Pizzullo...
Well, Senator McKim, if you ask the question, at least do the officer the courtesy of hearing his response. Now, Mr. Pizzullo, could you finish your answer?
I've finished.
Thank you. Now, are there arrangements in place for the PNG Defence Force to occupy the RPC site?
When you say to occupy it, they are the permanent owners. It's been separated from the naval establishment now for, what is it?
Well, the first question, Mr. Pizzullo, is do you know?
Yes, I do.
Oh, do you?
I do.
You know what the PNG...
It's their establishment and they're intending to occupy their full establishment.
You know that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
So this is the same Papua New Guinea Navy that fired over 100 rounds into the camp earlier this year, isn't it, Mr. Pizzullo?
I'm not sure that all of those inquiries have been concluded, Senator.
Well, in fact, your Border Force officers have given evidence to this committee, in fact, that over 100 rounds were shot by the Papua New Guinea Navy into the Manus Island RPC, some from semi-automatic weapons, others from shotguns. We've also heard that a Toyota Hilux was loaded up and rammed into the gates so that they could get in and into the centre that way. And I'm just asking you, this is the same Navy that you intend to abandon anyone left in the RPC after the 31st of October into the hands of the same Navy. Is that correct?
You can impute whatever you want in your questions. It's a naval establishment and it'll be returned to PNGDF authority and occupancy on the 1st of November. And
you've just said that it will be returned to PNG Defence occupancy, which is what this notice that I've provided with you with a translation of says. What arrangements, if any, have you put in place to ensure the safety of anybody left behind at the Manus Island RPC after the 31st of October? And I'm talking specifically safety from the Papua New Guinea Navy that in April this year on Good Friday fired over 100 shots into the centre and tried to ram a vehicle through the gates.
Well, the first point, Senator, is that they're not meant to be there. They're not meant to be on a military base on the morning of the 1st of November. And secondly, the maintenance of public order and issues to do with trespass and the rest of it are matters for Papua New Guinea.
Yes, but Ms Newton's just given evidence to the committee that she's aware that 606 people are refusing to leave.
They need to make their own decisions.
No, but Ms Newton's already said she's aware that over 600 people are refusing to leave, Mr Pizzullo. Don't you think you're risking a human rights disaster here and potentially a mass loss of life?
No.
No, I think that's a rather colourful appreciation of the situation. I don't think it'll entail a mass loss of life, and I don't think it'll entail the loss of life at all. PNG is very seized of these issues. It's thinking very carefully about how it might deal with what is regrettably attitudes that are being stoked and fuelled by troublesome outsiders who are encouraging these poor souls to...
Just spare us the fake sympathy. You've been torturing them for 4.5 years.
We put up with your editorialising. We can allow the Secretary to complete his answer.
I reject any assertion that this department's been torturing anyone. The only torture I'm aware of is sometimes when we have to appear here. But Senator, I can absolutely.
Well, I just don't think that's I don't think torture is a laughing matter, Mr. Pizzullo.
Well, I don't know how to get through to you on occasion, Senator, whether it's by deft, responses or just by, frankly, sometimes highlighting just how silly these conversations can get. The PNG authorities are well seized of the fact that. Because we engage with them constantly, that there is I'll use this term just to try to be as neutral as possible, that there is a narrative that is encouraged that if you move, somehow this is part of a trick, that if you move to one of these establishments that Ms Newton has indicated, you're a step further from ever coming to Australia. I'll just call it a narrative. I'll be as neutral as I can, Senator, without at all being pejorative by way of any imputation. It is challenging to deal with that narrative when people, because they're not detainees, they're not prisoners, they've got access to the internet and so on and so forth. When people are given that idea that if you just, quote, dig in, and this is, again, I'm just trying to use very neutral phraseology, that somehow the Australian government's will or the will of the Australian people or through UN condemnation, somehow Australia will break and you'll all come to Australia. That is what is animating the choices that people are making at the moment. It's regrettable, and through my evidence and testimony today, hopefully I can be as clear as I can, that will not deviate the government from its policy, and that there is perfectly reasonable, appropriate accommodation and other supports for the necessity of life that you mentioned earlier available in alternative locations.